Good afternoon. This is part 1 of chapter 13. In this video, we're going to continue looking at instrumental music of the classical period. Let's take a look at some of the important genres in the classical period. For orchestra, we're going to have the symphony. So the symphony is going to be one of the main, probably most important genres that comes out of the classical period. And then the concerto is another important genre that will come out of the classical period. The difference between the concerto in the classical period versus the Baroque period is we're only really going to see solo concertos in the classical period. We're not going to see any of the concerto grossi. Most of the concertos written in the classical period are going to be all solo concertos. An example would be like a piano concerto or violin concerto. Another aspect of instrumental music that we'll look at is chamber music. And chamber music is a term that's associated with smaller groups of ensembles, 12 people or less. So string quartets would fit under this, woodwind quintets or brass ensembles. They'd be considered chamber music. We also see piano sonatas evolve in this arena as well. Or we'd see like a violin sonata or a flute sonata, and this will be a sonata for a solo instrument with the piano accompaniment. Most vocal music in this genre is really still associated with opera, and we'll take a look at some opera later on throughout this course. So let's listen to what a symphony orchestra playing a symphony in the classical period would sound like. Now, let's take a look at a concerto. And again, a concerto is going to have a soloist with a symphonic orchestra backing them up. In this example, it's going to be a trumpet concerto. So you'll hear the trumpet as the soloist. Now, for chamber music, we'll listen to a string quartet. And a string quartet is going to be a new genre that's really associated with the classical period. Next, a sonata. And finally, we'll listen to some opera from the classical period. Now, one of the most iconic genres that comes out of this period is the symphony, okay? And when we talk about symphony, there's two different ways we can look at a symphony. The first is we look at a symphony like a symphony orchestra as an ensemble, like your typical classical symphony orchestra with your strings, your woodwind, your brass, and percussion, of course. We can also look at a symphony like a multi-movement piece. Okay, so it's going to be a multi-movement piece for orchestra. And it's going to have 4 different movements in it. And it's a significant genre for public concerts. The symphony is the main, probably most important genre that comes out of this period. Okay, and the origins they come out of the Italian Sinfonia. It started with a one movement piece that had fast and slow sections throughout the piece. These sections then eventually evolved into specific movements. And so we'd have in this classical symphony, the first movement is going to be a fast movement. The second movement is typically going to be a slow movement, much more lyrical. And the third movement is what we call a minuet or dance movement. And then finally, to conclude the piece, is going to be another fast movement as well. So each of these movements, depending on where they're placed in the symphony, is going to have a set tempo expectation. During the classical era, we start to see a couple new things happen with the symphony orchestra. First off, we see the orchestra get larger. Okay, we have more people in the orchestra. And we see the orchestra go from a small private concert at a court, okay, or at a like a private setting. Maybe the Archduke's private salon would have his own symphony. And we see now, we're going to start to see in the classical era the emergence of public concert halls, where people are going to a specific hall to see and hear music. Okay, they're going to start to pay. They're going to pay money for it. You're going to start to see orchestras travel, and we're going to see the emergence of a concert circuit or a concert arena come out. Next, we'll see the expansion of the classical orchestra with the actual number of instruments that are going to go into a symphony. So we start to see more woodwinds being added, a lot more horns being added, and then of course the timpani starts being added as a percussion instrument. And we'll see other percussion instruments start to be added slowly but surely, especially in the Romantic period. Okay. Each section of the orchestra had a specific role to play or a specific assignment. And so, the strings presented most of the thematic material. Let's go listen to the strings. The woodwinds added a little more richness or colorful texture or counterpoint. Let's go listen to the woodwinds. The horns are going to add more harmony and maybe a sustained sonorous background. And finally, the trumpets and percussion, they provide brilliance. Lots of times the timpanis are going to add accents to pivotal moments. Let's go listen to this example. Continuing talking about the classical orchestra, we start to see the classical orchestra get codified to a set expectation of instrumentation. So we would start to see with the string section, we'd see the violins divided up in the first and second violins. You'd have the cellos and the double basses, and it would be about 27 players total. And then in the woodwind section, we would start to see, a set standard of 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, and bassoons. And of course, in the brass, we would see 2 French horns and then 2 trumpets. Later on in the classical period, we're going to see composers starting adding trombones. And then, of course, so the percussion instruments, and in the classical period, mainly would be the timpani. Okay. Later on, we're going to see other instruments, especially in opera, like the triangle being added, and other instruments being added for more color and more for effect. But as I said, the orchestra during the classical period is really starts to get codified, and this is kind of the classic example of the makeup of a classical orchestra. As I said, the symphony is probably the most important genre that comes out of the classical period. We're going to look at Mozart's 40th Symphony in G minor. Okay, we're going to look at the first movement of the piece, and the first movement, as I said earlier, it's going to be a fast tempo. Okay, and if you look at the diagram, though, each movement of a symphony is going to have a specific form and a specific tempo. Okay, moods sometimes are not exact. Okay, but the form, though, is definitely the first movement of a symphony is almost always in sonata allegro form, and the tempo is always going to be fast. The second movement is going to be a slow tempo, and the form may change. It may be a theme in variations. It may be a ternary form. Sometimes it can be a rondo form, but a ternary form or theme in variation, that's the main form of a second movement. The third movement is going to be a moderate tempo, and it's going to be a minuet and trio for the classical period. Okay, third movement is always this dance movement. Towards the end of the classical period, composers like Beethoven are going to switch out this third movement from a minuet to a new form called a scherzo. It's still going to have that ternary form, but the tempo is going to be very quick and rapid. And then finally, the last movement of a symphony is usually going to be a sonata allegro form, or theme and variations on occasion, or rondo. And the tempo is going to be going back to fast again. It's one of these things where we want to end the piece on an upbeat note or a positive note, or you want to have a big triumphant finale. So you want to have that fast tempo. Now, with Mozart's 40th Symphony, we're going to look at the first movement. And the first movement is going to be in sonata allegro form. The mood is going to be, it's a serious mood, okay? And the tempo is going to be, it's going to be fast. It's in a minor key, so it's in the key of G minor. So it's going to have more of a darker tone to it. So looking at sonata allegro form, the first movement of a symphony is going to be in this form. And the sonata allegro form is going to have three main components to the form. You're going to have an exposition. The middle part is going to be a development. The final part is going to be a recapitulation. Okay, so these are the three main areas of a sonata. Okay, a first movement, a sonata, or the sonata allegro form. The exposition basically functions just like you can see the word expose in exposition. The idea is to introduce all of the thematic material. So we'll have a first theme, okay, and that's going to be what we call the tonic key of the piece. The second theme is usually in the dominant key, and then we have a closing theme kind of to wrap everything up. In addition, the exposition, it's going to be played twice. So we start from the first theme, we transition, go to the second theme, we go to the third theme or the closing theme, and then we repeat. If you see these two little dots when we were in the musical language, these two little dots with two bar lines, it's a repeat sign. That means you go back to the beginning. And traditionally, they always play the exposition twice. That way, we can really get familiar with all of the thematic material. And we can really understand it, and we can hear the key relationships. That's important, and we're going to find out when we get to the development section. So we play the exposition twice. When we come to the development section, the idea is the composer is going to take these main themes that he introduced in the exposition, and he's going to modulate them to different keys. He may take the themes apart. He may take different fragments of them. What he's going to do is he's going to elaborate on them. Okay, maybe he'll play the theme in inversion. Maybe we'll hear the theme in the bass line, and we'll have a new melody on the top. So the composers have all these little tricks and tactics that they use in the development section, and what it does is it makes the piece more interesting and more dynamic. So we go in a whole bunch of different themes. We explore a whole bunch of different new key areas. Okay, and then eventually towards the end of the development section, we go back to the home key that the exposition started in. In this case, it's going to be G minor. And what we have is the recapitulation. The recapitulation is basically, it's a restatement of the exposition. But a couple things have changed though. We're going to restate everything, but all of the main themes are going to be in the actual home key of G minor. In this case, it'll be G minor. And we're not going to have any more repeats. We're just going to play the theme all the way through. So we have the first theme, we move to the second theme, we'd have a closing theme. And then in some pieces, we'll have a coda. And a coda is just an option. It's an optional kind of a segment to the sonata allegro form, and that just kind of wraps everything up, kind of gives us a sense of finality to the piece. So when we listen to Mozart's G minor symphony, the first thing we're going to hear in the exposition is the first theme, and let's take a listen. Let's listen to it. So again, it's a very kind of intense, dramatic piece. A couple things to note about this melody is you have this two-note motive that keeps coming back and forth. Da-da-da, 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 da. And then Mozart keeps going with that two-line motive. Da-da-da, 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 da-da-da. And that's going to be an important theme that he manipulates, that motive, he's going to manipulate that throughout the symphony. Okay, so we want to pay attention to that. After we hear the first theme, the music's going to begin to transition to the second theme. So the transition or bridge sounds like this. And then we arrive to this second theme. The second theme contrasts the first theme, okay? The first theme was in a minor key, kind of aggressive or assertive. This theme is in a major key, and it's also very light and lyrical. Let's listen. And then finally, after the second theme is presented, we come to the closing theme. And the closing theme functions to wrap up all of the material in the exposition. So let's listen to this closing theme. Again, and you can hear that two-note motive getting thrown around in the orchestra, and what he's doing is he's setting us up to either go back to the beginning of the exposition or wrap everything up, and then we'll continue on to the development. So now we've arrived at the development section, and in this section we're going to hear the main themes go to different keys. They may get broken up, but we'll hear motives or snippets of them in different registers of the orchestra. In Mozart's, how he approaches this specific development is he has three sections of this. In section one, the first theme modulates through a couple different keys. And then towards the midsection, section two, he uses the theme as a fugue subject. That means basically he's going to have a lot more counterpoint in the development section, and you're going to hear this theme get bounced around the orchestra, maybe being played by the woodwinds, being played by the cellos, and then we're going to finally in the third section we'll hear the opening motive continue to modulate or continue to move through more keys. Let's listen to section one. Now, the section 2, as I said, it's going to be more dramatic and it's going to be more intense. In addition, we have more counterpoint. Let's listen. In section 3, it's going to be continue to modulate as well. Again, you can hear that two-note motive. It gets bounced around the orchestra. And then after that, we're going to hear what we call the retransition. This is the part where we're kind of out towards the end of the development section, and we have to go back now to the recapitulation. And so basically the retransition is going to be, we're coming back to, he's setting us up to go back to the key of G minor. Let's listen. And he just kind of easily, just gradually, slowly transitions, and we kind of just sneak right back into what we call the recapitulation. He does it very, very subtly and very, very elegantly. So now we're back at the recapitulation. The purpose of the recapitulation is that we're going to play all the same themes that we heard in the exposition. The difference is the recapitulation is now going to play all the themes in the tonic key. And for this example, where it's going to be all in the key of G minor. So the first theme is going to be similar to what we heard before. The second theme, however, when we heard it in the exposition, it was in a major key. Now it's in a minor key. So let's listen to the difference, though. I'm going to play it first. The example is what we heard from the major key. So when we come back to it, though, in the recapitulation or recap, we're not going to hear that. We're going to hear this theme now. It's going to be in a minor key. Let's listen to it, though. So again, Mozart presents the second theme in a minor key, then we have the closing theme, and then we have a coda to wrap everything up. So that's Mozart's G minor symphony for the first movement. So what I want you guys to do is to go back now and listen to the entire piece on canvas, and then try to identify what parts of the exposition, what parts of the development section, what parts of the recapitulation. So this concludes Chapter 13, Part 1. In this video, we looked at Mozart's G minor symphony, and we looked at the first movement of it. Please continue to watch Chapter 13, Part 2. In that video, we're going to look at string quartets of the classical era.